Welcome to our presentation of our Spring and Fall 2023 titles for Shadow Mountain Publishing. I'm Elise Levine, Director of Sales and Marketing. Shadow Mountain is a clean content publisher for children's and YA titles, which for us means no violence, drugs, sex, or foul language. But in the children's and YA titles I'll be presenting, you'll see that our characters don't live in a utopian world of goodness, but face all of the challenges of growing up in today's world. Let's start with Brandon Mull, the New York Times bestselling author of the Fablehaven and Dragonwatch series. In March, we'll publish Carnival Quest, the long-awaited series finale to the Candy Shop War, where magical candies give kids superpowers to fight a family of evil magicians. And since it takes place in a carnival, there's also a lot of scary elements, with a particular emphasis on creepy clowns. Coming in August is the first ever official Fablehaven cookbook, wondrous recipes inspired by the characters from the series, and will feature a Brandon Mull original short story. Coming in March from J. Scott Savage is the debut of the series Grayson Fox, School Treasure Hunter. He's a fedora-wearing pint-sized Humphrey Bogart who navigates through the bowels of his school to find a long-lost chest of toys which were confiscated from generations of bored students. The book is written in a colorful film noir style, peppered with similes and wise life lessons, like when Grayson describes the playground as where fortunes are made and lost. It's also filled with school humor, like having Grayson find a saved stack of textbooks titled Our 38 States. Book 2 coming in January is Grayson Fox and the Curse of the Illuminati. Janitor's School of Garbage is a standalone follow-up series to Janitors. In it, a former student in the first series is now a teacher and founder of the School of Garbage, who is training a new generation of young garbageologists to trash talk and fight evil. The premise is that garbage comes to life in animated creatures called junklets, who wreak havoc in elementary schools, and specially trained kids from the School of Garbage are sent to stop the rise of the trash monsters. The school is reached through a magical portal at the bottom of a dumpster, and the kids are in a race against time before the entire world is literally trashed. Next up is Middle Grade Empathy Building, with a new title from McCall Hoyle, featuring a dog friend from the book Stella in Just Gus. Gus was rescued after being abused as a puppy and trained as a livestock working dog. One day, Gus confronts a bear, and in fearlessly protecting his flock, injures his leg, making it impossible to continue his important work. He's placed with a family and meets Diego, who struggles with social anxiety. Gus realizes Diego needs a friend as much as his sheep needed a protector. But in order to stay with his new family and succeed in his new job, Gus has to learn to control his instincts, like barking and patrolling the neighborhood. The author, McCall Hoyle, says she hopes teachers and librarians will appreciate the gentle way Just Gus addresses the important topics of anxiety, loneliness, neglect, and trauma, and says even though she writes hopeful books for children from a dog's point of view, she tries to be authentic and real about the feelings expressed by her characters by drawing on the most emotionally vulnerable moments of her own life. This is a young reader's adaptation of The Paper Daughters of Chinatown. It's based on the true story of Chinese girls who were tricked into coming to America in the late 19th century and were compelled to face lives of brutal servitude by unscrupulous Chinese gangs. This adaptation follows the story of Tay Choi, who at age 6 is being sent away on a boat arranged by her father, who has sold her to pay off gambling debts, a not uncommon practice in China at the time. Alone and afraid, she is forced to go by the new name listed on her paper documents to start her hard new life as a servant in a gambling den. The story mostly takes place when Tay, now called Tien, is age 12, as she perseveres through her ordeal until she meets Dolly Cameron, a real social activist in this era, with whom she forges a powerful friendship and the hope of a chance for freedom, and eventually finding a new purpose in helping hundreds of immigrant women from China regain their lives and assert their long-denied legal and human rights. The authors say there are difficult chapters in American history, but it's important to read about them and in doing so will gain greater understanding, which will lead to more acceptance, and most important, they say, we will learn to love each other more as Americans. Virtually Me takes place in a post-pandemic world where kids who would have had social challenges in in-person school opt for a new virtual reality academy, thinking this is a dream come true. Avatars represent them in this 3D virtual reality environment, and the book follows several students as we see through their eyes that they cannot avoid the conflicts that made in-person school such a struggle. Coming in August by the same writing team of Chad Morris and Shelley Brown, The Wild Journey of Juniper Berry is a middle-grade fish-out-of-water tale about a nature-loving girl raised off the grid in a cabin in the woods who relocates to the city when her brother needs medical care. To help pay the family's medical bills so they can move back home, Juniper starts posting videos filled with things she's learned from observing animals and nature. Kids at school start to share her videos to make fun of her, but the posts go viral as viewers appreciate her wisdom and begin to see the world from a fresh perspective. A father's love for his daughter is joyfully expressed during their nightly routine when he braids her hair and shares imaginative and empowering bedtime stories in Only a Trentha Away. Trentha is Spanish for braid. In the story, Papa explains to Gia what the braids represent. This section will remind you of the people who love you deeply. This one is for the many people who will need your love. And this one will help you remember to love yourself exactly as you are now and who you hope to be. The author, Nadine Fonseca, says the book has themes of love and trust, but it also tells the story about a father learning to let go as he prepares his daughter to grow up to be strong and independent. Coming in the fall is an extraordinary picture book with a timely message about the good in humanity overcoming the evils of hatred and fascism. As Nazi armies invaded Europe, Jewish families found few countries which would accept them as refugees. Seeing their peril, Nicholas Winton set in motion an ingenious plan to legally send children alone to England to British host families. Parents begged him for help, and weeks later, Winton returned to London with the names and photographs of hundreds of children, even babies, entrusted to him by their parents. 50 years after World War II, Winton's wife found his long-forgotten scrapbook, the only record of her husband's remarkable but never spoken of efforts. The world learned of his extraordinary humanitarian rescue and the fate of these children, all on live television. Let's watch the clip.
All the letters. But back here is the list of all the children. This is Vera Diamant, now Vera Gissing. We did find her name on his list. Vera Gissing is with us here tonight. Hello, Vera. And I should tell you that you are actually sitting next to Nicholas Winton.
And it was just so wonderful, so terribly, terribly touching.
Can I ask, is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please?
Moving on to young adult, Beauty Reborn is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast about healing from the trauma of emotional and sexual abuse through the lens of a well-known fairy tale. In the story, Beauty's family is shown to be emotionally neglectful, and she therefore misses all the red flags from the first suitor who shows interest in her and eventually betrays her by sexually assaulting her. There's a key scene in the book where Beauty, after her betrayal, wishes people had banners over their heads, announcing them as good or evil. The author says we already have this in a sense with Instagram, and reminds readers that this isn't real and people are complicated. Let's listen to a brief clip from the author, Elizabeth Loham.
Since this is a YA novel, the sensitive topics are handled delicately. As the author, I drew on my own experience with trauma and recovery to write the story I wish my teenage self could have had. I wish I could say no teenage girl needs a heroine familiar with trauma of this nature. But the truth is, I needed one. I can only hope Beauty's story will offer comfort to anyone who needs it, and I hope it can be a resource for any educator or librarian who finds themselves in a position to help a struggling young woman.
And one more in YA. Journal entry, heading to school. I know what everyone will say. There goes the girl who tried to kill herself. This is the premise of Swimming in a Sea of Stars, a novel about teen mental health issues, particularly teens struggling with depression and suicidal ideation, with an emphasis on how healing and hope can come from small acts of kindness, and as such, every person can matter. Next up is historical fiction. Under the Cover of Mercy is one of the few books available about the incredible story of Edith Cavell, who was a British nurse during World War I and a pioneer in modern nursing care, who helped hundreds of Allied soldiers escape from German-occupied Belgium once they came into her care after being wounded. Cavell was arrested, court-martialed, and executed by firing squad, and her death became a rallying cry used by the Allies to gain support for the war effort against the brutality of the Germans. If you Google her name and World War I propaganda, you'll see recruitment posters, which were very effective in getting more men to join the fight. Along a Breton Shore takes place in the aftermath of the French Revolution during the Reign of Terror, as the overthrow of the monarchy leads to chaos with state-sponsored violence and public executions against its own citizens, caused in part by the rivalry between France's two leading political parties. Coming in the fall, World War II historical fiction, Under the Java Moon by Heather B. Moore. It's based on the true but little-known story of Dutch citizens who were put in detention camps when the Japanese invaded the Dutch East Indies, now called Indonesia, and follows the story of one family who are separated. The mother and children face the brutal conditions of the camps, with disease, beatings, and near starvation threatening their lives daily. The father has barely survived the bombing of his minesweeper as he floats in a small dinghy in the merciless heat and sun in the Java Sea, praying for rescue. When the Japanese invaded the Dutch East Indies, millions of Indonesians were enslaved as forced laborers, some sent away to other islands like Burma and Siam. By the war's end, 4 million died as a result of harsh labor and starvation, including 30,000 European civilian deaths in the detention camps. And this book is one of the few to look at the war from the perspective of this part of Southeast Asia. 20/40 60-minute dinners is a cookbook uniquely organized by time-available scenarios. Several recipes also feature gluten-free alternatives. Nieder's Bakery and Cafe is from the restaurant chain which is popular in the Western states and was founded 25 years ago by the authors, who were fascinated with old-world European baking techniques, which they perfected into their own artisan bread, which became the basis for their bakery and cafe. This is a compilation of recipes from their most requested menu items. Rise Today is by Jason F. Wright, the best-selling author of Christmas Jars, which has sold more than 500,000 copies. This book is like an extended greeting card, with a message which offers hope in dark times, offering specific counsel he's learned in trying to live a Christ-centered life. Once Upon a Climb is by best-selling author Jennifer A. Nielsen, and is subtitled 5 Steps Every Dreamer Should Know. It's a book for anyone looking for guidance on how to reach the summit of your personal dreams, from choosing your team carefully, to choosing your route, to preparing for the final stage, crossing the crevasse. It's filled with the author's hard-earned life lessons and will be out in January, in time for New Year's resolutions. We have 2 Christmas titles coming out in September. The Christmas List of Richard Lindsay is a picture book set during the Great Depression, when a little boy wonders how the family will celebrate Christmas and buy gifts when money is tight and hardship is just around the corner. But he uses the $1 in coins he has saved to buy everyone on his list a meaningful present to provide each person with a moment of joy. Witnesses of Christmas is a new nativity experience for families to read and perform as a sing-along the beloved carols of the season, with text by author Jason F. Wright and music by the woman called America's violinist, Jenny Oakes Baker. Sheet music to beloved Christmas carols is accompanied by QR codes of instrumental audio tracks performed by Jenny Oakes Baker. Moving on to Proper Romance, a series which is clean content, meaning it has all the passion and longing you'd expect in the genre, but there's no onstage sex, so it's suitable for all ages. We'll return to Western romance with Sarah M. Eden's Wyoming Wild, when a woman asks a hardened U.S. Marshal to join her fight for justice and rid a small town of her corrupt father, who is their sheriff. The Queen and the Knave is the final book in Sarah M. Eden's Victorian Dread Penny Proper Romance titles, and from that 5-book series, we'll publish the Dread Penny Society compilation of all the Penny Dreadful short stories from the Proper Romance books, plus 3 new stories. Penny Dreadfuls were popular fiction during the Victorian era and ranged from ghost stories to adventures to lurid crime dramas. Next up is Megan Walker's February Regency title, Miss Newberry's List. The writing style has been described in reviews as making you wish you were born 200 years ago, in terms of the courtly manners and knowing how to flirt. The story is about a woman who is bound by an agreement to marry a duke she has only met twice. But before her wedding day, she wants to secretly complete a bucket list, which serves in the story as a way for Roz to understand herself better as she lives out her dreams. She enlists the help of her best friend, who brings along her cousin Charlie, who has come to the countryside to mend his reputation and learn how to be his father's heir. He is working out his past as she is taking control of her future. A Heart Worth Stealing is a Regency romance about an independent woman who hires a private eye to help her track down the thief of her late father's pocket watch when the local authorities prove incompetent, but she discovers a more frightening plot against her. The Art of Love and Lies is a Victorian romance about a free-spirited artist who is an expert in reproducing parlor versions of classic masterpieces, who teams up with a no-nonsense detective when she sees her own reproduction painting on display at an art exhibition after someone stole the original, and the evidence casts suspicion on her. These are 2 proper romances coming in the fall. Windsong Manor is by Julie Wright, who has written several proper romances for us. In this book, Eleonora comes from a life of privilege, but when her abusive husband dies, she finds herself a widow, finally able to choose her own path, until she meets a man far below her social status, who she falls in love with. Protecting Her Heart is a Victorian romance by Nancy Campbell Allen, featuring a woman who is educated in America as a doctor, who must return to England, where women are not licensed to be doctors, when her father dies and she must attend to the family estate. Teachers, librarians, and booksellers can request ebook review copies on Edelweiss and NetGalley. Thank you, and feel free to reach out to me directly for any product information at ilevine@shadowmountain.com.